Hey everybody, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. Today we have an episode, my guest is Steve Anderson, and Steve wrote a book called the Bezos Letters, and yes, Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame, and it's really more interesting than I thought. Once I dove into the idea of the messages that are kind of hidden in his annual letters to shareholders, they rival what Warren Buffett has been doing for years. And Steve has taken these and sort of put together 14 principles that come out of it. And we talk about a few of them, about how Amazon was able to make decisions and iterate on things quickly. By taking more risk, they were able to mitigate their risk. And all these things kind of weave together. And there's a lot of applicability to what a major force like Amazon does to the small business owner who's doing a $10 million construction business. So some really good lessons here. So go grab a cigar, grab a cocktail, strap in for another fun episode of Sales and Cigars. So Steve, I appreciate you taking some time to jump on the podcast with me. I thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure, Walter. It's great to be here with you.
So I'm kind of excited about some of this conversation because of the book and Amazon. Everybody's familiar with it. I think there's some lessons to be learned. So we'll get into that. I think it'll be fun and entertaining for the audience and educational, which is part of this. Because my goal for the podcast is for Walter to have fun, to meet interesting people, and then everybody learn something along the way. So I think you're going to make that super easy.
Great.
So let's start with, how did you get to where you are with your business today? This sort of entrepreneurial journey. We don't need to go back to middle school or grade school, but I had a guy the other day, Steve, that went back to third grade,
Wow.
and he had a great story, a great reason for it. Like, I
Yeah.
failed the third grade. I had to repeat the third grade, and that lesson carried him through to him. He's in his 50s, and it caused him to like think about his opportunities in a different way.
Yeah.
And
I can
it
see that.
wasn't just paying attention. It was just a different philosophy. So it's kind of fun. So can you
Yeah.
share a little bit about
I'd be
how
happy
we
to.
got to?
A-
All right.
And I won't go back to the third grade, but I will say that my entire career has been revolving around the insurance industry. So early in my career, worked for two independent agencies doing just about every job, selling and operations and customer facing stuff. Got interested in the technology, and again, this is 80s, 90s, early and 2000s, and left the industry directly and started my own consulting firm in 1999, helping insurance agents with technology. And as we know, continued to develop very rapidly, lots of new stuff coming, a pretty risk averse industry in terms of adopting new stuff.
Very
So
conservative.
yeah, very conservative, and rightly so. I mean, it's not bad per se, but you want to know that your insurance company is there to pay for an accident if that ever happens. So, with all the technology change, I started asking the question, is the biggest risk agencies face, and now I think businesses in general face, is the biggest risk the actually not taking enough risk. So I started to kind of playing around with this idea, looked at a lot of companies, some very successful at one point, no longer here, some successful and still here. And I was trying to understand where the differences are. Came across Amazon, certainly as a successful company and continues to be successful. and came across Jeff Bezos' Letters to Shareholders, and started reading a couple here and there, and realized there was a lot of really good information that Bezos included in those letters. Now, if you've read shareholder letters, normally they're boring and they just tout the company and all the great things they do. Bezos was very different. How he wrote them was very different, and what he talked about was very different. So I literally sat down and
Did
said,
he actually write them? Steve, did he actually write them
I
himself?
believe he did. Yes, I believe. And part of what happened is when I read them all, and there were, I think, 21 at the time, I read them through as a narrative, one after the other. And there were
Okay.
themes and threads that went through those letters. So I would say the only exception, I think, and I don't know this for a fact, but the 2019 letter, so the first kind of pandemic letter, I'm not sure he wrote all of it. The tone is different, how it's framed is different. That would be the one exception I would say, but the rest of them, I believe, I'm sure he had help, no question, but
Sure.
he did the
Yeah.
final draft. Because again, like I say, the tone, the ideas, all kinds of stuff were very similar. So that led me literally to create a PDF white paper, 1-page executive summary for each of the letters that he had written so far. And I was going to give away as a lead gen, right? Here's some great information about how Amazon has been successful that I believe any business owner could take advantage of. Fortunately, my wife has been in the book publishing business almost her entire career. Showed it to her, talked to her about it. She looked at it and said, "This isn't a white paper, this is a book." And the publisher she was working for echoed that almost immediately. And so the next probably 18 months to 2 years was spent turning that white paper into the book that was published.
While you're trying to run a consulting business.
While I'm running, yes, a consulting firm. Yeah, it was, that's a whole long story. We probably don't have time, but there's a really big difference between writing articles and blog posts, which I had done for years, and writing what ended up being a 65,000 word book. And I learned that difference, sometimes painfully, through that process.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a different. I wrote a short book. What my producer was like, he calls them a shook, right? A short, helpful book.
Uh-huh.
And it was less than 5,000 words, and you can read it in 45 minutes. But just that very different from what you wrote, but it's very different from writing an article or a blog post or some
Yep.
social media. It's a different thought process. You need to carry a thread all the way through those
Right.
chapters, and what you were doing was interpreting information that was somebody else's, and you had an advantage, right, in that you read them as a narrative, which is a cool way to look at it, and then you could spot threads that
Hmm.
maybe Jeff knew about it, maybe he didn't, maybe they were all planned, right? I mean, that is that kind of we're trying to
I
unpack
think
here.
some of them were planned. I think a lot of them were just part of who he was and part of his mindset in terms of how Amazon could become really the first online bookseller selling books to the everything store selling everything, and certainly where they are today. So I think part of its mindset. I think the other thing is I call Bezos actually the master of risk because of how I at least interpreted how he used risk strategically to grow. And that's a very different mindset, especially coming out of the insurance industry,
So
right?
yeah,
Where
can we
everything we
talk
do
about
is
that?
go
Yeah,
ahead.
let's go into that because, the insurance world. I mean, you don't get these beautiful buildings that insurance companies own with all the marble for them taking a lot of risk, right? They've made a lot of
Right.
money over the years and then been strategic with it, not known for risk. And so he used risk in your perspective. He was using risk to calculate it and to move forward? And how is that different than just an entrepreneur, you know, going out, hey, I got an idea and I'm going to go take a swing at this?
So
How is it, how
in
is it
some ways
different?
it's not, and I would say Jeff Bezos, and people forget this now. He started like every other entrepreneur with an idea he thought would work, and he actually said to his wife, Mackenzie, at the time, "I don't know if this is going to work," but and this was in 1995, so the internet was brand new. Nobody knew you could sell even stuff over it. Really bold thought and idea. I think where it's different, or at least where he honed it better, is the idea that experimentation is required to invent. So he literally invented a new way of selling, but he experimented a lot and he failed a lot. So that's where a lot of entrepreneurs don't think strategically about failure, meaning how can we mitigate the risk of failure when we do fail, and we're going to? How do we maximize the learning from it and take that forward? And again, I can give you lots of examples at Amazon where they tried multiple iterations of a product or an idea. The first two, three, or four failed until the fifth one worked spectacularly well. From Prime, Marketplace, the Kindle, I mean, all of those things were invented based on failures that they experienced as they were being developed.
So is it, I'll, I used to watch a lot of boxing matches. And, you know, inevitably, if you get five or six guys together to watch a prize fight, somebody says, this guy just won $300 million in, you know, 37 minutes, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
3 minutes if you knock somebody out. And that always irritated me, because it minimizes what that boxer had done for like years of preparation, running, eating, not eating, eating stuff that isn't tasty, but it you know does the job. All of that work, and I think that is that similar to what you're talking about with Bezos is making making those mistakes, but not making them with a huge bet, and being able to go back and like not be totally surprised and deflated that there was a failure, and then recognizing that iteration was going to be part of it. Is that part of the
Yeah.
mindset that
Yeah, it is, and I
you're
think there are a
talking
couple.
about?
So again, I I created 14 principles based on the shareholder letters. So a couple of those come into play in this conversation. One is long-term thinking. So in the very first letter, 1997, so Amazon went public in 1997. The 1997 letter actually laid out his philosophy of business. One of those was long-term thinking. And what he said is, we will make bets on the long term, not short-term Wall Street expectations. And I would say Bezos pretty much single-handedly was able to do that. I mean, they lost money for like 15 years. I mean, how do you do that and still be successful? Well, they lost money, but they were investing it back into the business because he felt the internet was a land rush. If you remember, you know, the land rush and people getting the property, well, he bet everything on growing as fast as they can and really kind of trying to corner the market, at least in their areas. And then they continue to think long term. And one of the phrases he used was, like, let's just take Prime real quick. So free shipping, annual, fee to be part of Prime. And internally, executives said, we can't do that. How are we going to afford to pay shipping and not have people pay? Well, you know, at the very beginning of the internet, that was a big barrier, right? People would go through their cart, they'd pick stuff, and then all of a sudden it was a $25 shipping fee on top of everything else, which may or may not. So they maybe decided not to buy. Jeff was trying to take that barrier away, focusing on the customer. And what he
Mhm.
said was, yes, it will be expensive, and if we focus on the customer and invent on their behalf, ultimately it will be better for Amazon and for our shareholders. But that ultimately is a long-term vision. It may take a number of years, and that's where he's willing to invest and has that long-term view. And I think too often in businesses, it's a short term, we've got to make profit this quarter and cannibalize. And I think that has killed more businesses than it's helped.
Well, because I think there's a point there with there's a bunch of points there, but one of those with where if they're trying to make a quarterly number, hit a forecast, so Wall Street is comfortable that they met their projections, you're likely to make decisions that are going to get you there, but not going to help you in the next 3 quarters or next year, and that is sort of a mindset of that corporate mentality. And I think what Bezos is different in is that he was an entrepreneur. He
Hmm.
started the proverbial thing out of the garage, stacking stuff up himself in boxes. So he came from that world. It wasn't his expectation that we sacrifice today for we sacrifice tomorrow for today.
Hmm.
And some of the other companies that have had success that came out of that similar mindset, little companies like Microsoft and Apple, those guys were founders and entrepreneurs, and some people would argue crazy people for
Yep.
taking that level of risk. It paid off, but I think that's the mindset. And when you go look at places like General Electric or General Motors, right? They're looking at, we got to hit a number, we got to keep these people happy, and even when they tell somebody that we're gonna struggle for the next 6 months to do this, but here's why, they're not willing to pay the freight to do that. That's
Right.
it's what's to me that's a great, is that what it is Bezos what had an entrepreneurial mindset from the beginning?
Yeah. Oh, I
Is
think very much so. Yeah. And again, a little backstory, but his grandfather was one of the early employees of what would become known as DARPA. So I think that, and he would spend his summers for almost a little over 10 years at his grandfather's ranch in West Texas. And he learned to be self reliant. He learned that if something broke, we weren't going to drive 4 hours to the closest Home Depot to get
right,
something. We had to figure out how to do it on the ranch. And so I think
right.
all of that built into him this idea of self-sufficiency, and I can figure out how to do this. And that translated well into growing a business like Amazon.
So the other thing and there's like so many ways to go with this, Steve, but one of the things that I noticed when I was preparing for this conversation was the velocity that he made decisions, the how we went about it. So can we talk a little bit about that and how that might translate to entrepreneurs of little smaller companies in Amazon, and how they might
Yep.
be able to implement some of that?
Yeah, so you're referring to high velocity decisions. And again, something he talks about in one of his shareholder letters is he described two different types of decisions that a business makes. And he called them type 1 and type 2. Type 1 decisions are bet the farm, big decisions. I mean, really, could what's the right word? Crash a company if you made the wrong decision. And he said those decisions you make slowly with as much information as you possibly can get. He says, but most decisions in a company aren't those kinds of decisions. They're type 2. Type 2 decisions are, what's our next product launch? What type of product should we invent on behalf of the customer? Those kinds of things, and all the little decisions that go into actually releasing something like that. And what he said about type 2 decisions is you make them fast with as much as 70% of the information you wish you had. So you're not getting all the information. And the reality is, if you make a bad decision or the team who's empowered to make that decision makes a bad decision, you can pivot pretty easily. It's not devastating to the company. And if you have that mindset of, yes, we think this is the right way, and let's move forward, and you move forward a couple steps and go, nope, this isn't working the way we thought it was going to work. Let's change it. Let's stop it. Let's kill it. I mean, there are all kinds of options available. And he said what happens as companies grow is that bureaucracy tends to be built because now you have multiple layers of decision making, as opposed to at Amazon, they drive the decision to the team that has the capability of making the decision. And that may not need approval up the line. Because he said when you do that as a company, all you do is slow growth. You slow the amount of time it takes to actually get something done.
Hey, thanks for being part of the Sales and Cigar community. I wanted to share that I wrote a book, The 7 Critical Mistakes CEOs Make with Their Sales Organization. The CEOs who've read it tell me I cut to the chase quickly, get to the point, explain exactly what they're experiencing, why they're experiencing it, and how to fix it. So if you want a free copy, go check out the link in the show notes. Now let's get back to the interview. So to do that, and it's one of the things that I see with business owners with their business objectives and their business strategy and aligning that with a sales organization, it's they come up with these concepts, and you know they're larger points, their values, that their flowery language, that when they try to push that through to the organization, the people don't really understand how what they do on a daily basis impacts and how they can actually affect that vision. So, and that's usually the disconnect, right? That the vision isn't translated it to the guy on the shipping dock saying, you know, you get to make the decision. If you see the box is all crashed and smashed, that you shouldn't send it out because it's going to cause a problem. You get to make that call.
And let me add.
So what Amazon?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but let me add at that point, that employee also at Amazon is empowered to go, why is the box crushed? Let's fix the problem that caused it so it doesn't happen again. I'm sorry, but that's
that's perfect, because it actually makes the point that I was trying to make, is that somebody has given that authority at that level of function to, like, you have this authority, do it. And even if you're wrong, you know why you made the decision, and now we can fix that with more information for that individual. Risky, but at the same time, you're putting that risk in a box that's kind of small.
Yeah.
And you can iterate and change.
Yep.
But that takes guts.
It takes guts. No question about it. This is not easy stuff. And I would say that what you just described touched on several principles. One is encourage successful failure. So, in fact, Amazon has a very, very small R&D department that only is focused on hardware. Their R&D is their employees. Every employee is expected to figure out how to do things better. And again, the focus is customer focus, meaning customer obsession. Also, there's a principle of maintaining standards when you hire employees. So at Amazon, it's hard to get hired. And they hire A employees because A employees want to work with A employees. But once you start hiring just to fill a position, now you're introducing a B or a C employee, and they don't typically get raised. They bring the team or whatever, wherever they're at, they bring them down, not that the team elevates them up. So they're and this is, for me at least, an important point. I have 14 principles. They all stand alone, but they all interact together. So it's the mindset at Amazon and the culture that Bezos has created over the years that allows this stuff to happen. And you're absolutely right, Walter. This is hard. It's not easy.
And it has to be consistent. You got to be willing to hire the best people that you can hire, train them, give them the right education and tools to facilitate their role, and and then step back and let them go. It's not unlike raising a teenager and watching them go off to college and hope to God they make good decisions, right?
Right. Yep.
It's a similar concept, I think, and but being able to do that in business. So is that idea of passing that through and creating that alignment. That's how I look at it. Is that we have alignment. And the story that I mentioned about the guy on the shipping dock that decided to pull something, that happened to me in my career like 15 years ago, where the shipping guy like, hey, say, hey, by the way, I pulled this box because it's damaged. We'll fix it and then we'll get them out tomorrow. They got enough of the product to get going. And I'm like, Gary, that's amazing. Like, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
And so I called the customer and told them like, here's what happened, and Gary made this call and did this, and we'll have these over to you tomorrow. And he's like, he did what? He made that decision? You realize what that does for us? I'm like, yeah, I do. That's why I'm calling you to tell you. So they made a special trip. That particular customer made a special trip over to say thank you, give some swag, kind of apparel and stuff
Yep.
to our shipping guy, because that's so uncommon. Because it's somebody's got to take that risk rather and think, and just like, well, that's it. Well, they could let it go, but he didn't. But that's one person in a small company. We're talking about this with a huge organization, top down. Let that team make the decision because they have the most information to do it.
Right. Well,
That,
and if you hired quality people, you hired them for a reason. So let them make those decisions. Don't try and micromanage them.
right, and that's sort of one of the things that Steve Jobs used to say, right? Don't hire smart people and tell them what to do. Hire
Right.
smart people and get out of their way.
Get out of their way.
Although he didn't always follow his
He
own
didn't always
advice,
follow
but
that, but yeah.
so I think the other part of the story, the part that I've picked up on was the idea of like customer obsession, and how that plays out with what most of us think about customer experience and that. So can you talk a little bit about how
Yeah, I'd be
Amazon
glad
views
to.
that?
And I'll start referencing back to that 1997 letter. So I already mentioned the long-term thinking. Also in that letter, he mentioned we will be customer obsessed. And again, I've always thought that word choice was very interesting because obsession can be negative, right? It can be like too over the top, too focused, too much. And in terms of customer, is that even possible? Can you be too obsessed with the customer? Well, Bezos doesn't think so. And what he says is, we will invent on behalf of the customer, and we will know our customer so deeply that we are able to understand what they would want if they knew they could have it. And again, I think there's a little bit of kind of Apple-ish things there, obviously coming up at similar times. And again, businesses talk about customer journey and customer focus, but obsession just has a whole different connotation to it, and
Yeah.
it's weaved throughout Amazon and throughout the letters. I mean, frankly, he talks about obsessing over customers, and we did Kindle because we had the audacious goal of reinventing something that has been around for 500 years, the book. And
The book.
what do customers want? Well, customers weren't asking. There were a couple e-readers already out there. What Amazon did was invented a new way of using electronic readers. One of the big things was you didn't have to connect your reader with a computer to download books. One of the big inventions was the ability to use wireless internet access to find, buy, and download a book in 60 seconds or less and start reading it.
That, yeah, the WhisperNet was what he started calling it, right? The
Yeah,
ability
well,
for
and
you to.
WhisperNet is a little bit different in that WhisperNet allows you to continue reading a book on a different device at the exact spot you
Ah,
left off. So
yeah.
that's Whisper
It,
Sync. And now they do it with audio and the physical book. And it's become kind of, oh, of course we can do that. At the time, you couldn't. You had to kind of search
right.
for that next spot or where you had read to. And technologically, very difficult to do.
Yeah, you've created a digital bookmark where you can
Yes.
pick up the book from a in a completely different environment, and you're
And,
in
and
the
it,
same spot.
it could have been months since the last time you had picked up. I mean, so they had to keep track of all of those spots, those bookmarks. You're absolutely right. Incredibly difficult, and they figured out how to do it. And it's all because it's better for the customer.
There's some amazing. I mean, we could talk for hours about this.
Well, I
I,
certainly could.
it,
So,
yeah, the idea. I mean, I guess I'm curious. You probably get this question a lot, but has you have get any thoughts from Mr. Bezos? Has he gave you like you saw the secret sauce, or he just
no. And I never reached out to him as I was writing the book because it wasn't an interview kind of book. There are other books that do a great job of Amazon's history and growth and all of those kinds of things. I didn't want to duplicate that. Um, I do know through a friend connection in Seattle that a copy of the book was actually handed to Andy Jassy's, the current CEO, wife a few years ago. So whether he at least saw the cover, I have no clue, haven't heard anything about whether he read the book or not.
that's cool. Um, I think this is, and let me guess, somebody can find this book on Amazon. If they
Very
want
much
to
so.
go pick it up and grab it.
Yep,
All right,
absolutely.
we'll have that in we'll have a link to that in the show notes. So let me this, like I said, we could talk about this for hours, but from sales and cigars is our business. We're able to relate this, I think, to entrepreneurs. But um, does Steve have a relationship, past or present, with cigars?
I do. Not present. I am not a cigar aficionado myself. Past, as my dad very much was. And
Hmm.
so, I don't mind being around cigars. Um, and it always brings back memories of my dad. He passed away many years ago. Um, when I smell a cigar, and he loved them, had probably a couple a day for I don't know how long, but yeah, definitely brings back those kind of memories.
Smell is one of the biggest triggers for memories.
Hmm.
It triggers them so fast and so vivid. Um, and I've heard that a couple of times from folks that it reminds them of a particular person or a particular moment in their life. And it just, to me, it speaks to the idea of cigars or something to appreciate and can start traditions and all of that. And we can argue about whether it's a vice or a bad habit, and I don't care.
I don't. I know
It's
that's okay. Yeah, it's not something I enjoy, but that's okay. I'm glad you do.
awesome. All right, Steve, I will have the website in the show notes. You're kind enough to put together a sales and cigars landing page for the guys. So we'll have that in there. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you sharing some thoughts. We might have you back on to talk about some of the other principles.
Oh, that'd be great, Walter. Again, thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate it. Hey, thank you for being part of the Sales and Cigars community. I want to take a quick second to share that I'm doing a free sales hiring challenge this month. I'm going to give you everything you need to hire sales superstars and avoid the sales duds. Check out the link in the show notes to be able to sign up for free.